The Mandalorian Season 1 was really good. I really liked it, and I'm glad the show exists. The show is really interesting given the landscape of Star Wars current events. Ever since the release of The Last Jedi, people love to crap on literally anything, and I mean anything. They got annoyed at a kids cartoon that was, in quotes, rewriting history, but then The Mandalorian came out and people for the most part really liked it. I myself thought it was amazing. I haven't made any videos on The Mandalorian really because, I've been making a lot of videos on the sequel trilogy, but with Season 2 coming out, I thought now is the perfect time to make some Mandalorian content. Now, the way this video is going to be structured is me reviewing each individual episode, because as much as people would like to treat Season 1 as a movie cut into 8 parts, that's not really how it works. Each episode, for the most part, is its own contained story, so you can't just jumble it into one large story. So I'm going to talk about each episode and what I think works and doesn't work. Even though this video is titled Why Was Mandalorian Season 1 So Amazing?, I don't think it's a perfect show, but there are definitely a lot of storytelling lessons that can be learned here. Now, at the time of writing this portion of the script, I actually haven't rewatched any of the episodes since the day the last episode was released because I binged the whole season on that day. Now, you may be wondering, hey stupid idiot, shouldn't you be rewatching the show that you're making a video about? Especially since you haven't watched it in like 10 months? And to that, I'm gonna say yes. The way I'm gonna write this video is that I'm gonna rewatch each episode, but after I watch each one, I'm gonna jot down my thoughts about it. This may work out, it may not, but I'm here to take risks, so let's see how this goes. So after I cover all the episodes, I'll probably give some sort of conclusion at the end, along with my rankings of the 8 episodes. Also, assuming my fat ass isn't gonna be lazy and I'll actually finish this video on time, I'm gonna do some short speculation on Season 2. Realistically, I should probably just guess a bunch of different things and hope something sticks so I can clip it out of this video later on and say I was right. But that would be disingenuous, and I'm not disingenuous. But if Baby Yoda dies in Season 2, you heard it here first. So let's start with The Mandalorian Season 1 Episode 1 titled The Mandalorian? That's kind of lame. Wait a minute. The Mandalorian? Mandalorian? Ryan Johnson, you sneaky bastard. The first thing I noticed right off the bat is how genius this introduction scene is. The scene sets the tone for the show, and is also an excellent introduction for the character of the Mandalorian himself. The first shot of the entire series is an over-the-shoulder close-up shot of the tracking fob. The idea of choosing this as the first shot in the show I think was really smart. Every Star Wars movie except for Solo has begun in the stars, hence the name Star Wars. We usually get a pan-down shot of the entire planet that the movie will begin on. It's a wide shot, and most of the time it'll usually also encompass a ship flying towards said planet. Star Wars has always been about scope and scale, and what better way to do that than to use a wide shot of a planet? Now, here with The Mandalorian, we are already on a planet, and to make things even feel more claustrophobic, it's a close-up shot of an item in someone's hand. What this shot tells the audience is that this is not your usual Star Wars. This isn't going to be a show about large space battles or city planets. It's going to be a much smaller scale show that really focuses on the characters and doesn't have galactic-wide consequences. And the show doesn't stray from this either. The final battle of the season is a battle that involves one TIE fighter. Imagine that. After space battles that have dozens of TIE fighters, this climactic battle only has one TIE fighter. Now, this isn't a bad thing. It just shows how well this shot sets the tone for the show and how the show sticks with that tone. The next part of the scene also continues to brilliantly set the tone for the show. We enter a bar and for about 20 seconds we focus on some drunks harassing some blue alien dude. Now, this bar isn't like some damn college bar or something filled with horny frat guys doing stupid shit. This is a Western bar with older folks. This also helps set the tone that this show is more of a Western rather than a space opera. This show will be more about the criminals and the underworld of Star Wars instead of rebels versus the Empire. Again, setting the tone is really important when it comes to film, and this opening scene does a great job of that. I love when Mando walks in and everyone stops what they're doing immediately. Without saying a single word, the Mandalorian's presence already has significant weight to it, and he doesn't have to say a single line of dialogue. If you followed my channel for a while now, you know I love scenes that say a lot without having any dialogue, and this is a great example of that. It reminds me of the first John Wick movie when everyone was talking about how dangerous John Wick is when he hasn't harmed anyone in the movie yet. It's an effective way to highlight a trait of a character without them showing that trait. For the next 2 minutes or so, Mando doesn't even say anything. He quietly goes to the bar and proceeds to kick everyone's ass who tries to get on his nerves. I love this because it shows how actions speak louder than words. If Mando walked in and was just telling everyone how he will kick their ass if someone crosses him or how strong he is, he wouldn't be as cool or as mysterious. He doesn't need to taunt people back. He'll just make you eat your words and kick your ass. A dude gets cut in half, and to him it's not even a big deal. I love that about this opening scene. He hasn't said a word yet and we still get a look into his personality. And even afterwards, he just walks up to the blue dude and just stands there and puts down the bounty puck without saying a word. The visual language of this scene perfectly displays who has all the power here. The blue dude is talking and he sounds nervous, and Mando just walks up to him and says nothing. After the blue dude tries to make a deal, Mando has had enough and he finally says something.
I can bring you in warm, or I can bring you in cold.
The first line from Mando was badass. He's a no-nonsense guy. There is no negotiating with him. You're going with him no matter what, alive or dead. A really badass line. And just like that, in 3 minutes, we get a good understanding of the tone of the show and what our main character is like. Brilliant writing on the part of Jon Favreau. This next scene I also think is really well done. I love when they're trying to get a speeder, the same type of alien dude from A New Hope shows up. I think people forget that as cool as Star Wars is, it's kind of stupid, and I love that. I couldn't help but smile when I first saw this dude. So they get a nice speeder with a droid, and Mando says screw droids, so instead they get a speeder that is crap with the person driving it. This is the foundation of a really good character arc Mando goes along this season, and I'll get more into that later. So they get back to the Razor Crest, and after the older dude gets eaten by that big monster, the blue dude is freaking out. Mando grabs him and they try to take off. While the blue dude continues to freak out, Mando calmly handles the situation and they're able to take off. I love how Mando doesn't freak out here. He's calm, and this shows he's confident in his skill set. Just another way to show how badass Mando is. I like how when they're just Jay chilling on the ship, the blue dude keeps on asking Mando questions and Mando doesn't respond once until the end. It shows how closed off Mando is personally, which is why his relationship to Baby Yoda is so powerful later on. We even get a mention of a big plot point when the blue guy asks Mando if it's true Mandalorians never take off their helmet. As someone who's seen Clone Wars and Rebels, this has always been a little strange to me. In those shows, no Mandalorian ever has a problem taking off their helmets, but here they do. I don't think this is a contradiction or anything. I bet Dave Filoni does have an explanation for this that we'll probably get in season 2. But the blue dude continues to walk around, and eventually Mando has had enough of his shit and freezes him in carbonite. By the way, I love how they mentioned Life Day. I love when Star Wars acknowledges how stupid it is, and this is just great. But again, this scene is another example of how Mando is a no-nonsense type of guy. Now, one criticism I do have about this show is how we never have a clue what planet we're on. Yeah, sometimes they mention the names of the planet, but it's very rare. It's a small complaint, but I like to know these kinds of things. As someone who follows the lore, sometimes I'd like to know if we are visiting a returning planet or not. Again, small complaint. This planet that he goes to, I guess, is like the bounty hunter headquarters, and it's named Navarro. He has a talk with Greef Karga in a bar, and again we get a similar response from the crowd that we got earlier. Mando has a reputation, and people know it. He chats with Karga for a bit after Mando returns the bounty fobs, and he immediately asks for more work. I feel like whenever someone is constantly asking you for more work,
I am human, still.
it just shows how lonely their personal lives are. So this was another small way to emphasize this characteristic of Mando, that he's a loner, and I like that. So he's told about the bounty that will inevitably lead to Baby Yoda, and he meets with the Empire. We get more Easter eggs like the security ball and the gonk droid. These are small, insignificant Easter eggs, but sue me, I love it. Now this meeting with the Imperial dude known as the Client is a fantastic scene. We know that the Empire is gone, but they are still here. The stormtroopers are dirty, and now the Empire is the one hiding around. It's a nice subtle piece of world building of the universe post Return of the Jedi. Mando walks in, and the Client is telling him how he's heard great things and how he's the best in the parsec.
He said you were the best in the parsec.
That line was always weird to me, but I can get over it. Then the Doctor walks out and Mando takes out his guns, and so do the stormtroopers. When the stormtroopers tell Mando they have him outnumbered like 4-1 and Mando's like, I like those odds, I just thought to myself how badass that was. Kinda reminded me of Han Solo a little bit. So afterwards they talk more about the asset, and the mystery behind this scene is excellent. We don't understand why the Empire wants this asset so bad, or what the asset is, or why it needs to be alive. The hint that the asset is 50 years old is a great way to subvert our expectations later on. And when Mando leaves with the Beskar, the Client gives this line about how Beskar deserves to be in the hands of the Mandalorians after a period of disarray.
It is good to restore the natural order of things after a period of such disarray. Don't you agree?
We still don't really know what he's talking about by the end of the season, but it's still a neat mystery that clouds the show, and I can't wait to know what happens. Before I move on, I want to make it clear that this video isn't going to be a scene-by-scene breakdown of the entire first season. I just felt that these early scenes are the ones that are really important and really well executed, so I wanted to highlight them. Moving on, every aspect of the second half of this episode is fantastic. This whole sequence on this Tatooine knockoff planet is excellent as well. It's full of Star Wars fun and action, but easily what makes this scene and the other scene with the Mandalorians is the other characters that he interacts with. The Mandalorian woman, Quill, and IG-11. All three of these characters are vastly different, and we learn a lot about Mando through these characters. With the Mandalorian woman known as the Armorer, we get a good look at the Mandalorian culture. This tribe or whatever is forced into hiding by staying in what appears to be the sewers. For fans of the Clone Wars and Rebels, it makes us wonder why these Mandalorians are forced into hiding. It's another question that will be hopefully answered in the coming seasons. We also learn that the Mandalorian was a foundling, which is something that will be explored later on. The sequence with the forging of the Beskar is also fantastic. One aspect of this show that I really love is that it seems to try and incorporate all aspects of the Star Wars canon. Here in this brief flashback we get a look at the super battle droids from the prequels. Instead of trying to treat the prequels like it's this dark period in Star Wars history, Lucasfilm is now embracing it, and I love it. Now, considering the sequels are events that haven't happened yet in the Star Wars chronology during the time of the show, it's harder to make references to it, but they still try, like with the reference to Canto Bight in episode 6.
It's like a Canto Bight slot machine.
The value that the Mandalorian places on the Beskar is also excellent world building of the Mandalorian culture. Now, this entire sequence on this knockoff Tatooine, I feel is just perfect Star Wars fun. The blurgs are so cartoony, but here they managed to make it work. Again, I love when Star Wars acknowledges how silly it is. We are introduced to Quill, who has great scenes with Mando as well. Unlike the beginning part of the episode with the blue guy, you can tell that Quill is someone that Mando clearly respects. You also can't talk about Quill and not mention how great the "I have spoken" line is.
I have spoken.
You know you're creating a good character when his main line is repeated all across pop culture. The training sequence with Mando in the blurg reminds me a lot of the scenes with Luke and Yoda in The Empire Strikes Back. A warrior is struggling with training and it's getting impatient while the older, much shorter character is teaching with great advice. I think that's what I really love about this show, that it takes aspects of Star Wars that we are familiar with, but makes it fresh and new. We see Mando struggle a bit, and I really like this because, we don't want to have a main character that is a Mary Sue. By the way, I made a 2.5 hour long video on why Rey's not a Mary Sue, so go check that out. The way Quill declines any payment from Mando is also really honorable. He just wants to bring peace to his valley, and that's something we can all respect. However, it's the encounter with IG-11 at the end of the episode, which I think is the best part of this sequence. We know Mando hates droids, so this just adds another layer to this scene. The banter between Mando and IG-11 is also hilarious. I couldn't help but laugh every time IG-11 brought up self-destructing, and Mando was just like, stop it. This entire scene was really well made and is just perfect Star Wars fun. The action is also really good. It wasn't easy for these two to win this battle, and I think that's important. I think these two really worked well together, and I was upset at first when IG-11 died, but given where his story ends up, I am totally fine with it now. I also love when they enter the building and Mando is able to just dispose of the last pirate really quickly. His quick draw is badass. And at the end of the episode, we finally meet Baby Yoda. I'm not sure I can emphasize this enough, but the concept of Baby Yoda is so genius that Jon Favreau deserves an award for just coming up with this idea. I think this may actually be the smartest decision in all of Star Wars storytelling since the inclusion of the original Yoda. If you look at the 5 Disney era films, they all have something that they try to use to draw in the audience. The Force Awakens has Han Solo, Rogue One has Darth Vader and the Death Star, The Last Jedi has Luke Skywalker, Solo has Han Solo, and The Rise of Skywalker has Palpatine. All of these characters and the one battle station I mentioned are pre-existing, however Baby Yoda is a new character. A problem I thought this series was going to have initially was drawing in the casual audience. Not everyone loves science fiction or especially Star Wars, but everyone can love a cute baby, especially girls, and Baby Yoda isn't here to just sell toys. His existence is essential to not only the plot, but also the development of the main character. I could go on for hours as to why I think Baby Yoda is so genius, but I think you guys get the point. Overall, this pilot was amazing, and I wouldn't change anything. Well, except for that parsec line, that I would definitely change. I'm gonna give this episode, Season 1, Episode 1, The Mandalorian, a 9 out of 10. An amazing start to this series. Now, on to Episode 2. Episode 2 is titled The Child, which is weird considering Baby Yoda doesn't really play a big role in this episode. Anyway, the biggest criticism of this episode is that it's called a filler episode. Now what does filler mean? A filler episode is an episode that isn't really necessary in the season, and usually only exists because the season needs a certain amount of episodes. A lot of people call episodes 2, 4, 5, and 6 filler episodes, because if you look at the overall plot of the season, those episodes don't really progress the plot. In the case of episode 2 for example, episode 1 ends with Mando finding Baby Yoda, and episode 3 begins with Mando and Baby Yoda on the Razor Crest arriving back at the Bounty Hunter headquarters. If a first time viewer watched episode 1 and 3 and skipped 2, then they aren't really missing anything with the plot. The viewer can safely assume that after episode 1, Mando just took Baby Yoda back to the Razor Crest and left the planet. However, there's a big difference between plot and story. Yes, episode 2 does not really progress the plot of the season, but it definitely does progress the story. There are many story beats in this episode that are very important for adding emotional weight to the plot-heavy episodes. For example, the relationship between Mando and Baby Yoda is further developed in this episode. We see Mando start to grow a soft spot for Baby Yoda. Also at the end of the episode when Mando fights the Horned Beast, Baby Yoda is the one who saves him. No, Baby Yoda didn't sacrifice his life for Mando, but he did put himself in harm's way considering he passed out after using the Force. These moments are important because in episode 3, if we don't buy that Mando cares enough for Baby Yoda, then him risking his life to save the child isn't going to work narratively. And besides his relationship with Baby Yoda, Mando's relationship with Quill is further expanded upon as well. After his ship gets ransacked, he goes straight to Quill for help. and proceeds to take a significant amount of time to help out Mando. It appears that he travels all night with Mando to go meet the Jawas, just to help him get his parts back. Also at the end of the episode, Mando offers Quill some money and a spot as a crewmate. He politely declines both. Quill declined the money because he is grateful for Mando bringing peace to the valley. He also says something about Mando being a guest, so it's just him helping out his guest. It's hard not to love a character that is so kind and so wise, and we got a little bit of that in this first episode, but here we get even more. Also, when he declines the offer for being a part of Mando's crew, he states how he spent a lifetime in servitude and now he wants to rest. This line makes his inevitable death in episode 7 so much more heartbreaking. We want someone like Quill, who is so kind and generous, to live that peaceful life he's so happy to have, especially after a lifetime of servitude. His death now means so much more than if we only saw the first episode. The last thing that this episode does really well is that Mando is really tested in this episode. There's a great storytelling rule that I love. Coincidences that help your characters are bad, but coincidences that hurt your characters are good. It's a coincidence that the Jawas found Mando's ship, and because of that, he has to spend a whole episode trying to resolve this problem. He proceeds to get his ass kicked by the Jawas, and then gets beaten up even harder by the Horned Beast at the end. Both times Baby Yoda is there with him. He's like a kid that doesn't want to leave his dad's side. One thing we learned in the first episode is that Mando has a code that he follows. Yeah, he's a bounty hunter, but he has some honor. Baby Yoda has always been there whenever Mando got his ass kicked. When Baby Yoda saves him, it makes it harder for Mando to abandon him in the third episode. That would be something that really wouldn't be honorable for Mando to do. Again, it's another example of how Baby Yoda's presence in this episode is essential for their relationship to grow. So those are the main reasons why I don't think this episode should be considered filler. Now, just because it's not a filler episode, that doesn't mean it's automatically good. I would say overall I like this episode, but I don't love it. There's not really anything in this episode that I dislike, but there's nothing I love either. I do really like the chase scene in the beginning with the sandcrawler. I think it's a good example of how to do an action scene. An action scene is really good if there are many obstacles the character needs to overcome. Mando spends a lot of energy trying to get to the top of the ship, and on his way up he gets knocked down a few times, items are thrown at his head, and he hurts himself a little bit. But after all those mini challenges, he still manages to get to the top where he gets stunned off and hurts himself even more. There are plenty of other action scenes in Star Wars that I don't think are very good, but this is definitely not one of them. And the same can be said about the fight at the end, except there he gets far fewer mini victories during the fight. There are a few other much smaller things in this episode I really like too. I'm not gonna lie, it really did make me smile seeing the Jawas and a sandcrawler again. I love the humor between the Jawas and Mando as well, especially when they were talking and the Jawas mocked how Mando spoke their language. The excitement of the Jawas when Mando brought them the egg was also hilarious. I like the foreshadow moment of Baby Yoda trying to force heal Mando as well. And lastly, I'm a human being. My heart warms up every time Baby Yoda does something really cute. Call me a 15-year-old girl or whatever, but I do have a huge soft spot for Baby Yoda. Also, I think it's important to keep in mind that Star Wars is for kids. Sometimes it's important to have these episodes that are kind of these one-offs and their own contained story. Now, while I may not be the biggest fan of these episodes, they're still really important to the kids. My final score for Season 1, Episode 2 of The Mandalorian, titled The Child, will be a 7 out of 10. A good episode, but not great. Episode 3 is called The Sin, and the episode goes back to the main plot of the season. Mando returns back to the bounty hunter headquarters and returns Baby Yoda. I believe that this episode should be taught in film school as an example of how to express emotions without using facial expressions. Conceptually, it's not the best idea to have your protagonist be faceless, whether that be because your character is always wearing a helmet or because he's a robot or something. But here with The Mandalorian, it works because all the directors, and in this case Deborah Chow, understand how to express emotions through a helmet. The first half of this episode has many great examples of this. In the beginning, after he picks up Baby Yoda and puts him back in his moving crib, he turns around to look at him briefly. His body language here screams that he is conflicted. When you look at something like that, it implies that you care for it. It's the same reason why in Return of the Jedi we were able to read Vader's body language without him saying anything. When he looks at Luke getting electrocuted, we see the same face we've seen all trilogy, but because of the way it's filmed and how Richard Marquand directed this scene, we know Vader is conflicted and he doesn't want to see his son die. This is why I find him screaming "no" so offensive. For those of you who didn't know, in the original scene, Vader didn't say anything. He just picked up Palpatine and threw him over the ledge. In this special edition, George Lucas decided to add Vader screaming "no" twice. This is completely unnecessary because the visuals already do a great job expressing how Vader feels. Now, him screaming "no" doesn't ruin the scene. It's still my favorite scene in all of Star Wars, but it does hurt it just a little bit in my opinion. Back to The Mandalorian, the scene where he actually delivers Baby Yoda back to the client is masterfully crafted. There are many little hints throughout this scene that Mando giving up the child is not easy for him. We see this when the stormtroopers grab the crib and Mando says "easy with that." It's a small line, but it shows he cares for the well-being of Baby Yoda. Even after the client gives Mando a compliment about his reputation, he immediately asks more questions about Baby Yoda. He asks how many fobs were given out, and when the client tells Mando that he gave out many, we can assume that Baby Yoda is really important to them. For me, what seals the deal is the look Mando gives when they're taking Baby Yoda away. He was just given an insane amount of Beskar. The metal that we learned earlier is very important to him and his people. However, he seems completely unconcerned with that and is giving most of his attention to Baby Yoda. And immediately after he disappears, the first thing he does is ask the client what they're gonna do with him, which the client points out is against the Bounty Hunter Code, which Mando definitely knew. Throughout this episode, many times we learn that Mando cares much more about the child than he does the guild code. We see this again when he asks Greef Karga about what the Empire will do for the kid. And the last thing that pushes Mando over the edge to make the decision to go back and save Baby Yoda is when he looked at the lever in his ship. The lever with the little twist-off metal ball is focused on 3 times in this episode. Once in the beginning when Baby Yoda first takes it off, a second time in the middle of the episode right before Mando decides to go save him, and the third time at the end of the episode when Mando successfully saves Baby Yoda and took him back to his ship. Having the first scene establish a connection between Baby Yoda and the lever is really important, so when we see it a second time, we know what Mando is thinking about and he doesn't have to tell us. So when he turns off the ship just after previously turning it on, we know what decision he is making, and again, he doesn't need to tell us. The directing of these moments was so well done, and I don't think Deborah Chow gets enough credit for it. While Mando saving Baby Yoda was easily the most important part of this episode, there were still plenty of other really cool things I loved here. After he gets the Beskar back, we get a much deeper look into the other Mandalorians. Mando returns with a lot of Beskar, and this seems to bother a lot of the other Mandalorians. We get another mention of this Great Purge, which we still don't entirely know what happened, but we can logically infer that the Empire did something that wiped out a significant portion of the Mandalorians. There's a moment between Mando and this larger Mandalorian that really fleshes out their culture as well. It's a new concept to Mandalorian culture that they aren't allowed to remove their helmets. The focus on Mando never removing his helmet throughout the season is essential for one of Mando's most powerful moments later on, so focusing on it here with the other Mandalorians was smart. We also get another small flashback montage. I know I said this earlier, but it makes me so happy that Lucasfilm is not ignoring their prequels. They are an important part of the Star Wars canon, and just because many people and myself don't think the films are all that good, they don't deserve to be ignored. Seeing B2s again in live action is just great, and I'm so grateful for that. Also, I love here how they're kind of menacing. In the prequels, they're just stupid droids, but here they're really menacing. It's a small thing, but I love when we first see Mando in his new set of armor. He walks into the bar, and everyone immediately looks at him. It's kind of like that first scene in the pilot, but here it carries a little more weight because he looks even more badass. And man, this new armor does look really good. The other thing about this episode that I have to mention is the action. The whole sequence with Mando actually saving Baby Yoda was excellently done. It wasn't too quick, which would have made Mando seem overpowered. The fight scenes are great, and it shows how ruthless Mando is. I think this is a big reason why a lot of people love this show. Mando is a really badass guy who puts up a strong exterior, literally and figuratively. However, he has such a soft spot for a baby. Makes for a really interesting character dynamic between the two that I think is genius. Seeing Mando fight through a dozen stormtroopers with a baby in his hand and a blaster and a flamethrower in the other is just amazing, and I never knew I needed that. Regardless of all this great action, it's when he is outside where the best action is. He starts walking to his ship and we see a bunch of the other bounty hunters come outside because they obviously want Baby Yoda. And even outnumbered like 30 to 1, Mando still takes those odds and tries to fight his way out. One thing I want to mention is that I feel bad for the droids in this series. They are always killed no problem, and they're basically second-hand citizens. I know that's how they've always been treated, but I don't know, it makes me feel bad. I love how during the escape, Mando is able to show off his whole arsenal. He does have badass weapons, and you bet your ass he should show them. The best part of the sequence for me was when all the Mandalorians showed up and started helping Mando out. I do think this aspect is underlooked. Yeah, it's really cool, and it's always been a dream to see Mandalorians fight together in live action, but this decision by the other Mandalorians to help out Mando is a big risk. Mando even mentions how all of them will need to relocate now, and the heavy Mando just says this is the way. Oh my god, I can't believe I forgot to mention this is the way. Similar to the helmet situation, this is a new aspect of Mandalorian culture, and I love it. I can't put my finger on it exactly, but I love how this line really represents their culture. They fought earlier inside the sewers and broke it up by simply saying this is the way. It's just a really cool line, I guess. I know this is awful analysis, but that's all I got with this line. The episode ends with a small confrontation between Mando and Greef Karga, and Mando outsmarts him and is able to escape. It wasn't really clear to me in this episode, but I do think Mando intentionally shot Greef Karga where the Beskar was. He was shown where the Beskar was earlier, and it seems like the two have a solid working relationship. Maybe I'm reading this wrong, but I don't think Mando would want to kill him. And then the episode ends with Mando wanting to get a jetpack, which is solid foreshadowing because he uses the jetpack later on. So overall, I really love this episode. It has great action, great character development, and great world building. When it comes to which episode I like more, this one or the first episode, it's really tough. I think both episodes are fantastic, but I think I'm going to give the edge to the pilot. The pilot is usually the hardest episode to get right in a television show, and I think episode 1 definitely did that. So I'm going to rate The Mandalorian Season 1 Episode 3 The Sin a 9 out of 10, just like episode 1. But to clarify that I like episode 1 just a little bit more, I'm going to change that ranking to a 9.1 out of 10. These episodes are both so close, but again, I'm going to give the edge to episode 1. So, 3 episodes down, 5 to go. Let's continue on with episode 4. Episode 4 is titled Sanctuary, and it's the second episode that people love to call filler. Now, when I discussed the second episode, I covered what I thought classified as filler and what doesn't, and to me this episode is not filler. While this episode is its own little side story, this episode is essential for Mando when he makes his decision in episode 7 to go back to the bounty hunters and face the guild. The plot of this episode is clear. Mando wants to find a place to take Baby Yoda so he can live a happy life. He goes to this random planet that seems to be pretty remote and decides this would be a good place to leave Baby Yoda. When he gets there, he goes to this little restaurant or whatever and meets Cara Dune, who inevitably becomes one of the main supporting characters later on. She declares this planet hers and Mando has to leave. However, a group of farmers from the opening sequence find Mando and ask for help. He initially declines, but after hearing that their village is in the middle of nowhere, he decides to help them with the intention of leaving Baby Yoda there. After an episode-long conflict similar to Akira Kurosawa's Seventh Samurai, he is ready to leave Baby Yoda here and move on. However, a bounty hunter finds Baby Yoda and almost assassinates him, and Cara Dune saves the day. Mando realizes that Baby Yoda will never be safe if he just leaves him somewhere, so he decides to take Baby Yoda with him and they leave the planet. This ending sequence is why this episode is really important. If this episode was skipped, then a question the audience could ask themselves, why can't Mando just take Baby Yoda to some random ass planet and leave him there? This episode addresses that. So compared to an episode like episode 2, this episode actually somewhat advances the plot of this season. The second episode didn't really advance the plot at all, but it did advance the characters. Here, this episode does both. When it comes to the characters, we are introduced to Cara Dune. She's a former rebel who wants to somewhat retire after the rebellion. She clearly proves herself to be a good fighter and someone that Mando can rely on if there ever seems to be a major problem. She isn't really given any backstory other than her part in the rebellion, but I don't think she needs that backstory yet. She's only in 3 episodes this season, so she isn't really important yet. But in season 2, if they decide to make her a character that appears in almost every episode, then they will probably have to take the time to flesh her out a little bit more. But overall, I really like her character. She's badass, she's smart, and probably the first time in Star Wars we have a woman who can win fights by simply using brute strength and doesn't need a lightsaber or a blaster. I like that about her. She's kind of a unique character in the Star Wars universe, one we haven't seen before. Besides her, we do get a deeper look into Mando as well. When he's alone with Baby Yoda in the beginning, he's kind of talking to himself and Baby Yoda. He says, "You ready to lay down low, you little womp rat?"
You ready to lay low and stretch your legs for a couple of months, you little womp rat?
I love this line. It gives Mando some humor and it reminds me of the way I talk to my dog sometimes, and it's just really cute. I also can't talk about this opening scene without mentioning the iconic button switching scene. This was just hilarious. Star Wars isn't supposed to be something super serious like a Christopher Nolan movie. Star Wars is fun and lighthearted, and I love that here. Now back to Mando. His relationship with the Widow is probably one that is the most interesting. When you put some thought into it, Mando probably has never had anyone close in his life that wasn't his parents or a Mandalorian. The question of why doesn't Mando just relax and abandon the bounty hunter life is addressed. This just isn't the life for Mando, and I completely understand that. When you're raised in a culture of fighting and violence, it isn't easy to just abandon it for something peaceful. But Mando sure does think about it. In the past, when someone touches his helmet, he immediately goes to fight them. But here the Widow has her hands on the helmet for like a few seconds and he doesn't move them. He definitely thought about it here, which is character development for him. Also, there's a strong focus on Mando and his helmet throughout this whole episode, which again adds more emotional weight for when he does take off his helmet in the last episode. Now, besides those aspects of this episode that I liked, I thought the episode as a whole was just okay. I definitely didn't dislike it, but it's not an episode that I look forward to rewatching every time I watch the whole season. While I do like the character moments, the plot is something that I didn't really enjoy too much. It seemed like a Clone Wars side type episode for me, and I'm not a big fan of those kinds of episodes. The second episode was also a side episode, but I found it to be a lot more enjoyable. The sequence with the Sandcrawler was a lot more fun than anything in this episode in my opinion. The interactions between Mando, Quill, and the Jawas was also just a lot of fun, and the sequence with what I now know is called the Mudhorn was also really fun. But here the sequences are kind of just meh to me. The final battle, while there are definitely some amazing shots, it just wasn't that entertaining for me. I honestly blame Return of the Jedi for the lack of enjoyment with this episode. A plot point of this episode is that the AT-ST is too hard to destroy, and Mando even tells everyone that they need to move out of the village because of the AT-ST. In Return of the Jedi, we see teddy bears take them out left and right no problem. So it's kind of hard for me to accept that an AT-ST is something that is really threatening. Fair or not, this is just what I feel when I watch the episode. Also, there are a lot of other smaller things that bother me, and by smaller things I mean complete nitpicks, but I didn't really have these nitpicks with the other episodes. Like when Mando and Baby Yoda are walking into town, I always ask myself, how is Baby Yoda keeping up with Mando? Every time Mando gets a few feet ahead, it cuts away, and then when it cuts back, Mando is back at his side. I know this is a super small nitpick, but I notice these kinds of things sometimes. Also, when Cara Dune says she's claimed this planet and Mando needs to leave, why can't he just go to the other side of the planet? And later on, right after Mando tells the Widow how he hasn't shown his face to anyone in decades, he takes his helmet off right in front of what seems to be an open window where everyone could easily see him. I can't be the only one who thought this. These nitpicks aren't really things that took away from my overall enjoyment of the episode, but they are things I noticed nonetheless. My final score for The Mandalorian Season 1 Episode 4 titled Sanctuary is going to be a 6 out of 10. It's a fine episode I suppose, but definitely not a favorite. I will give props to Bryce Dallas Howard. I didn't even know she was a director, and I thought she did a fairly decent job. But yeah, 6 out of 10. We are halfway done with this season. Time for episode 5. So episode 5 is titled The Gunslinger. Now when I watched this episode for the first time, I remember not liking it at all. This episode is the definition of filler. Episodes 2 and 4, as I explained earlier, both somewhat serve the overall narrative. Episode 2 has important character development with the relationship between Mando and Baby Yoda, and Mando with Quill. Episode 4 provided us with the introduction of Cara Dune, who will play a larger role later on in the season, and it also gave us a reason why Mando can't just simply run away and hide on a planet. This episode has none of that. If you watched episode 4 and then proceeded with episode 6, you wouldn't be missing a thing. The only thing that may have some long-term consequences is the tease at the end with the person who walked up to the dead body of Fennec Shand. Also, you could say that this episode shows us that Mando isn't really a good parent, but I feel like that is already kind of obvious. So yeah, I remember not liking this episode at all, and I was totally ready to give it like a 4 out of 10, but rewatching it, I was surprised that I was actually kind of entertained. I think at first when I first saw this episode, I was really focused on the forced nostalgia, and I really didn't like it, and I still stand by that. I guess it was cool to see the Mos Eisley Cantina again. I did find it neat that the bar was now run by droids when originally droids were not even allowed at the bars, but overall this kind of nostalgia doesn't do it for me. There's a bunch of little references, like the woman mentions Beggar's Canyon and Fennec Shand mentions Mos Espa, which by the way is the town Anakin lived in The Phantom Menace. Taro Calican was sitting in Han Solo's seat the exact same way that he was all the way back in episode 4. All these kinds of things I do find to be rather annoying, but it doesn't really bother me too much. But I think a big reason that I actually enjoyed this episode was because I loved the cinematography. Besides the shots that were repeated from A New Hope, I thought the visuals of this episode were excellent. When Mando and Taro were on the speeders going through Tatooine, I thought it was beautiful to watch, and I could say the same about the cinematography when the flares were shot up into the sky. Tatooine has always been a beautiful planet to look at, and here Dave Filoni, who was the director of this episode, took full advantage of that. But I do want to get back into the plot and explain why I don't think this episode works. As I said with the second and fourth episodes, both either further the plot or the characters. Let's see what happens here. The episode begins with Mando getting shot at by what I assume could be another bounty hunter. The guy steals Mando's warm and cold line, and then afterwards Mando outmaneuvers the guy and kills them, and then Mando was like, "That's my line." I don't really like it in shows or movies when a character says something iconic, and then later on someone else says it, or that same person says it again, and mentions how it's their line. Like when Yoda said, "Do or do not, there is no try," I always assumed that that was just something he thought of off the fly in response to Luke. But then in Star Wars Rebels, Kanan says the same thing to Ezra, and he mentions how that's something that Master Yoda used to say. Maybe I'm the only one on this planet who holds this opinion, but it kind of diminishes the line for me. Anyway, because his ship was really damaged, he arrives on Tatooine to ask for some repairs, and specifically asks that no droids help out fixing the ship. You could argue that this episode further establishes his disdain for droids, but I feel like that is already so well documented, and a few lines in an episode isn't really going to change anything for me. He goes to the cantina and asks for work, and he meets Taro Calican, who is a rookie bounty hunter who wants to assassinate the chick from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but he needs help. Mando decides to help him, and they travel to go try and find the bounty. I did like the scene with the Tusken Raiders, although I couldn't help but think to myself if Rey had been able to speak to the Tusken Raiders, that people would scream Mary Sue. Mando can speak to Jawas and Tusken Raiders and no one mentions it, but Rey can understand Wookiees and people freak out. Whatever. They find Fennec and make a plan to attack when it is dark so they can use the flares. The plan works, but a speeder bike is broken, so Mando goes to leave and find a dewback. While Mando is gone, Fennec tries to manipulate Taro into letting her go because Mando has a much larger bounty. I'll be honest, I really thought that he was going to let her go and she would kill him, which she probably would have. So when Taro killed her, I was genuinely surprised. This was actually something pretty smart, and I respect Taro a lot for that. People say he's the worst character in the show by far, and while this may be true, I didn't really find him annoying this time around. I found him to actually be quite relatable, and I enjoyed watching his character. So he goes back and holds Baby Yoda hostage, but Mando manages to outsmart him and kills him, saving Baby Yoda and the woman from the docking bay. So that's really everything that happened in this episode, and again, nothing really here affected the overall plot or the growth of the characters. So because of that, this is the only episode of the series that I would classify as actual 100% filler, which is unfortunate because this episode was directed by the God Emperor himself, Dave Filoni, but even the best directors of all time have made some garbage movies, so I can forgive this. I thought my score for this episode would be much lower, but I'm gonna give it a 6.1 out of 10. It's basically the same as episode 4 for me, but I like this episode a little more, which actually surprises me. I do think episode 4 is much better, but if I had to choose right now if I wanted to rewatch episode 4 or 5, I would probably choose 5. Anyway, that's it for episode 5. Let's move on to what I think is the most fun episode of the season. Episode 6 is titled The Prisoner, and I think it is probably the most fun episode of the season. Now, similar to episodes 2, 4, and 5, this episode is mostly its own contained story, and it doesn't really progress the plot of the whole season. However, I would say this episode hovers on the line between filler and not filler. There isn't much in this episode that has any long-term consequences, but I still think there's a little bit. I would say one of the reasons this episode exists is to develop Mando just a little bit more. The episode begins and he arrives on this station to meet with who appears to be an old friend. They talk about the old times, and then Mando meets Bill Burr, who was a former Imperial sharpshooter. I actually found it kind of neat how Mando takes a jab at Imperials here.
Former Imperial sharpshooter.
That's not saying much.
I wasn't a stormtrooper, wise ass.
It's an ongoing meme in Star Wars that stormtroopers suck at aiming, but it is never really addressed in the canon until now. We meet some of the other crewmates as well. We meet a Devaronian who is kind of the brute of the squad. This dude is the same alien as the iconic devil-looking dude from the cantina scene in A New Hope. And then we get this Twi'lek chick named Zeon, who is crazier than the wildling chick in season 1 of Game of Thrones. By the way, it's the same actress, that's why I made the connection. This Twi'lek is by far my favorite character in this episode. The most notable Twi'lek in Star Wars I would say is probably Hera from Rebels or Aayla Secura from the prequels. Hera is this brave rebellion general who serves as a mother figure to the main character Ezra, but here Zeon is just straight up crazy. She hisses at people and she talks in a really creepy way. I would be lying if I said she wasn't so much fun to watch. I love the jokes that everyone in the group makes involving the past between Mando and Zeon. If these jokes are true, I didn't think crazy would be Mando's type. And then the last member of the crew is this droid named Zero. I like Zero quite a bit. He reminds me of K2SO from Rogue One, but more independent and definitely more on the evil side. I would say this episode fleshes out Mando because these are the kinds of people that Mando used to hang out with. In the first 5 episodes, I always assumed Mando spent most of his life as a loner, and here we get a look into the people that he may call friends. It shows the development he goes through, from someone living a criminal life to someone who serves as a father figure to a baby. So the plot of this episode is that the crew is going to infiltrate a New Republic prison ship and try to rescue someone who inevitably is revealed to be Zeon's brother. I think one of the reasons I love this episode so much is because this is really the first time we see Mando work as part of a crew. Yeah, he worked with Cara Dune in episode 4 and Taro Calican in episode 5, but both times it was just one other person he worked with. Here he's working with 4 other people, and I really like that. While they're on their way to the prison ship, I love the exchanges between the crew and Mando. Mayfelt, who is Bill Burr, has some of the best lines in this episode. As I said earlier, he makes a reference to Canto Bight, which is a huge win considering so many people hate that place. When they're talking about Mando's face, he asks if he's really a Gungan, which is one of the most hated species in Star Wars. I love how Filoni and Favreau are not afraid to make references to aspects of the canon that are widely disliked. Also, referencing Canto Bight and Gungans just 5 minutes apart really helps bridge the gap between the prequels and the sequels, and I love that. Throughout this episode, I really get a vibe that Mayfelt is somewhat threatened by Mando. He takes jabs at the Razor Crest in the beginning, and he makes a joke about how if Mandalorians are some of the greatest warriors, then how could they all be dead? That's a low blow, my dude. And then later on in the episode, he calls Mando out for not helping after he thought Mando disappeared. And then of course, when they're with the New Republic officer, there's a lot of tension there. I like this aspect of this episode, that someone feels threatened by Mando and tries to be the tough guy when Mando's around. So when they get to the New Republic ship, they wander the halls a bit and they fight some cool looking droids. I love the design of the ship, by the way. It reminds me of the Tantive V4 design, but more fit for a prison. Also, the fight scenes with the security droids are really unique because the creators have more flexibility beating the crap out of droids than they do with humans. With droids, you can rip their limbs off and you can see their blood, which is just oil, and you can see it splatter everywhere. With humans, you just can't do that in a Star Wars show on Disney+. We also get to see a lot of the gadgets that Mando has in this episode. I'm gonna get into this later, but Mando really reminds me of Batman in this episode in so many ways. Most notably, the next scene, which is when the crew meets with the New Republic officer. By the way, for those of you who don't know, the actor of this officer is Matt Lanter, who is best known for being the voice actor of Anakin Skywalker in The Clone Wars. I like it when a show honors a voice actor by giving them a small one-time role in a live-action episode. Matt Lanter is great, and I was really happy to see him in this show. Mayfelt and the others want to kill this guy and get it over with, but Mando doesn't like that. Things get a little more complicated when the officer takes out a device that will alert the New Republic to blow up the ship. Mando tries to reason with the officer and get Mayfelt to let this guy live. This is one of the reasons why Mando reminds me of Batman in this episode. Yeah, Mando may be a criminal, but he has morals and doesn't want innocent people to die. And on the other hand, we have Mayfelt and the others who are literal scumbags and have no problem taking innocent lives. This is another reason why I don't think this episode is complete filler. We get to see some of the morals that Mando has. When tensions are at an all-time high between Mando and Mayfelt, Xion throws a dagger at Matt Lanter's character and kills him, but he also manages to activate the device, which adds some agency to the episode. So the crew leaves and they find Xion's brother, named Quinn, who helps double-cross Mando. They leave Mando for dead, but because Mando is smart and resourceful, he is able to escape the cell. The next part of this episode is by far the best in my opinion. This whole sequence reminds me of that one sequence in Batman Begins, where all the criminals are trying to kill Batman, but he's just too quick and he's able to take them out one by one. So after Mando escapes, he scrambles the jammer so Zero can't help them, and he shuts off the lights and closes the doors. Mando is going to take them down one by one, and this sequence is filmed so well. His first fight was with the Devaronian. Mando gets his ass kicked here, but because he is smart, he is able to win this fight by closing the door on him. I want to mention the best part is when Mando tries to burn the Devaronian, but it doesn't work. It's so cool that a devil-looking character is immune to fire. I love that. Afterwards, he goes to fight Xion, which is a quick fight, but one that is still entertaining. The best part of the whole episode for me is when he attacks Mayfelt. He is alone in the blinking lights, and we slowly see Mando start to approach him before he takes him out. This is just classic Batman to me, and it was filmed so well. Once he finds Quinn, the other Twi'lek, he doesn't even try to fight Mando. He surrenders and lets him take him back to the hangar we saw in the beginning of this episode. The other aspect of this episode that was fun was with the droid and Baby Yoda. The droid doesn't have any morals. He would have no problem killing Baby Yoda for some money. And the part where Mando kills him and Baby Yoda looks at his hand is just hilarious. So the episode ends with Mando getting paid, and after he leaves, the older man orders Mando to be killed. However, Mando outsmarts them both and he plants a device on Quinn, which inevitably leads to their death, and Mando escapes with the money. This is just another example of how smart Mando is, and I like that our protagonist isn't just skilled but also really smart. And oh, by the way, he didn't kill Mayfelt, Xion, and the Devaronian, he locked them up in a cell. It's another example of showing his morals, and it's also just sweet, sweet justice. Overall, this episode was so much fun. It may not be important in the grand story of the season, but this episode is so rewatchable that I can't help but give it a higher ranking. I'm going to give this episode a 9.05 out of 10. It's basically on the same level for me as episode 1 and 3, but I like it a little more than 3, but not as much as episode 1. We are now done with all the side episodes, and we are on to what is basically a 2-part finale. Episode 7 is titled The Reckoning, and in reality, it is part 1 of a 2-part finale. However, since this episode is indeed its own episode, I will do my best to just review this one. The episode begins with Mando getting a transmission from Greef Karga. He gives Mando a plan to get rid of the Imperials so he and Baby Yoda can be safe. Knowing he really has no other option because of episode 4, he agrees, but first he needs to make some stops to get help. He first goes back to get Cara Dune, who is in the middle of a fight for money. I don't know why, but I just love this. The girl is a badass, and I love seeing her fight. Sometimes when I watch a movie, you can tell when the actor couldn't really beat up the person they are beating up if it was in real life, but everyone knows Gina Carano can kick almost anyone's ass, and her fighting skills are on point. Mando tries to recruit her and she declines, saying she has no interest in fighting because she has a peaceful life where she currently is. Mando tells her that they would be fighting Imperials, and then she says she is in. At first I thought this was a little weird. I get that she was a rebel, but to all of a sudden change your mind just because they are Imperials felt a little forced to me. However, given what we learn in the next episode about her being from Alderaan, I now have no problems with this. After he gets Cara, Mando's on his way to get Quill. I like the part when Baby Yoda tries to fly the ship. It was a funny moment, and as you guys know, I like my Star Wars when it's funny. So they arrive at Quill's home and they meet for some tea. During this scene, we get some neat character development for Quill. We learn he was sold into indentured servitude for the Empire. I like this little piece of backstory because, in my opinion, it makes his death that much more tragic. We also get a little montage of Quill fixing IG-11 and reprogramming him to be a nurse droid. This mini montage was pretty funny. I enjoyed watching IG-11 fail at certain things. Of course, Mando doesn't trust it because he believes that all droids are programmed in a certain way, and he doesn't trust Quill's programming. After some talking, Quill agrees to help Mando if he and IG-11 and 3 blurgs join Cara Dune and Mando for the trip to Navarro, which is the bounty hunter headquarters. One aspect of this episode I find really interesting is when Baby Yoda force chokes Cara Dune. We all know that this is a dark side power, so it starts to make me question Baby Yoda a little bit. Obviously, he's just a kid, so we can assume he is not on the dark side, but he is using the dark side nonetheless. We also saw in the second episode that he was kind of enjoying Mando killing the Jawas, and then in the last episode he was enjoying IG-11 killing all the stormtroopers. Maybe Baby Yoda is secretly really strong with the dark side of the Force. I'm gonna make a prediction that at some point during the series, whether it is in season 2 or not, that this will be addressed. So the crew arrives on Navarro and they meet up with Greef Karga and 3 other bounty hunters. They chat for a bit and then they start heading towards the city. While they are having dinner overnight, these bird-like creatures come and start attacking. They kill 2 of the blurgs and 1 of the bounty hunters, and Greef Karga is seriously injured. Apparently there was some poison in the scratch, so he was probably going to die. However, Baby Yoda comes and we see him force heal the cuts and everything is fine. I need to address this. Baby Yoda is a baby who can lift a mudhorn, use force healing, force choke people, and as we see in the last episode, can control fire. To those who think that Rey is a Mary Sue, how can Baby Yoda also not be a Mary Sue, but Rey can be? I think this is just another example of the double standard that people have on Rey, but this is a topic in my Mary Sue video, so go watch that. The next morning, Greef kills the other 2 bounty hunters and reveals that the real plan was to kill Mando and take the baby. However, he had a change of heart because of the events of the previous night. So they all agreed to a new plan. Mando, Cara, and Greef will go back into the city, and Quill will take Baby Yoda back to the ship and remain there. So they arrive at the city and they meet with the client. Basically, Moff Gideon arrives and kills the client and some of the other stormtroopers, and they surround Mando, Greef, and Cara. Mando tells Quill to take the child and leave the planet, but unfortunately, he is killed and the scout troopers leave with Baby Yoda and the episode ends. This death scene was really powerful. From the earlier episodes and this one, we've really grown to love Quill. He's just a really lovable and honorable character. He just wanted to live a life of peace, and because of the Empire, the organization he worked for most of his life, he wasn't able to get that. The saddest deaths in films are the ones that are tragic and unjust. This death is both of that. I was also shocked that they killed off Quill, so kudos to the writers for subverting my expectations, but in a good way. So that's really everything that happens in this episode. This episode is really hard to rate because it's the first episode that isn't really its own story. Whether or not you like the other 6 episodes, they are their own contained stories. This episode is mostly just putting the pieces into place for the finale. Now, I really like everything in this episode, but it doesn't really stand on its own. Since this episode was designed to not stand on its own, I'm gonna rate The Mandalorian Season 1 Episode 7 The Reckoning an 8 out of 10. It perfectly set up the finale, but it's not really an episode that stands on its own. We are now 7 episodes done, time for the finale. The 8th and final episode of Season 1 is titled Redemption. This episode is so good. I honestly don't remember this episode being as good as it was when I first watched it, but I love it now, that's for sure. There are so many things this episode does right that I don't know where to start. Every main character arc is concluded in a really satisfying way, and the further character development is also amazing. The most controversial part of this episode is probably the opening sequence. So we start the episode with the 2 scout troopers that killed Quill, and they took Baby Yoda at the end of the episode. Now these two chat for like 4 minutes, and honestly, I loved it. For those of you who didn't know, the director of this episode is Taika Waititi, who is probably best known for his work directing Thor Ragnarok. He is also the voice of IG-11, by the way. He is known for his humor, and considering I love Thor Ragnarok, I loved this scene too. There have always been these spoofed scenes where stormtroopers talk about the ridiculous aspect of Star Wars, like in Robot Chicken. One example is how the stormtroopers talk about Darth Vader killing his officers. Here we get basically that. The 2 scout troopers talk about not pissing off Moff Gideon because he just killed some of his officers too. And them trying to shoot the thing on the ground was also hilarious. Now, making these guys funny, there is the risk that the audience will grow to like these guys. So Taika made the smart decision to have these guys hit Baby Yoda, which is an instant way to make us hate them. Then IG-11 shows up and disposes of them instantly, which was really great to watch. IG-11 is such a cool and unique character in these last 2 episodes. He is probably my favorite part of this finale as well. After the opening sequence, we pick back up where the last episode left off. Mando, Greef Karga, and Cara Dune are trapped in the bar, and Moff Gideon and a bunch of stormtroopers are outside. By the way, I loved seeing Death Troopers, just a nice way to tie in Rogue One as well. Moff Gideon proceeds to monologue for a bit, and we actually learn a lot here. When he mentions Cara Dune, we learn that she was from Alderaan. Just like that, with one line, we instantly understand why she hates the Empire so much. This was so smart on the part of the writers, and I have to give them props for that. During this monologue, we also learn that Mando's name is Din Djarin. This isn't really something that is episode changing or anything, but it makes the relationship between Mando and Gideon to be a little more personal. Mando knows who he is because of some Mandalorian purge that supposedly happened. After the monologue, Mando talks about how he was a foundling and how Mandalorians aren't a race but a creed. We get the complete flashback, and now we understand that Mando was taken by the other Mandalorians when he was a kid. This fleshes out why he is so protective of Baby Yoda. Baby Yoda reminds Mando of himself, which is why it is so hard for Mando to give him away. They discuss a plan to escape, and Mando finds the sewers, but they're unable to break into it. Luckily enough for them, IG-11 shows up to kick some ass, and there's a big fight that ensues. Mando gets hurt, and he thinks he is going to die. Now comes probably the best moment in the episode. Mando is alone with IG-11 and refuses to let IG-11 remove his helmet. He says no living thing has ever seen his face since he was younger, and IG-11 proceeds to say that he is not a living thing. Mando lets IG-11 take off his helmet and lets him heal him with some Bacta. This is such an important and brilliant scene. Mando all season has hated droids, hasn't trusted them once. However, it's a droid that he allows to see his face in the end. The character development here was so genius, and I give the writers all the props for this amazing scene. So they enter the sewers, and Mando sees the Mandalorian armor from what we can assume are all the dead Mandalorians. Mando gets really pissed, but then the Mandalorian woman shows up. I really love this character. She always has really wise things to say, and she's a great representation of Mandalorian culture. She gives Mando his signet, which is the Mudhorn, and tells him that Baby Yoda is a foundling and that Mando needs to either raise him or take him back to his people. This basically sets up what we can assume will be the plot of the 2nd season, but we'll see. She also gives Mando a jetpack, which is a neat way to tie in with the end of the 3rd episode when he said he wanted one. So they leave and they go to the lava river. It's a short scene, but I love it when the Mandalorian woman wrecks the stormtroopers. Stormtroopers are no match for Mandalorians, and this scene shows that. So the crew arrives at the lava river and they hop inside the boat. Mando scans the end of the tunnel and realizes that there is a company of stormtroopers waiting at the end. After revealing this information, IG-11 decides that he needs to sacrifice himself with the self-destruct feature from the first episode. Mando tells him not to, and IG-11 tells him there is no need to be sad and that Baby Yoda will be safe. This is also probably the other best part of the episode. Throughout the season, Mando went from despising droids and not trusting them with anything to letting one see his face and actually feeling sad at the thought of it dying. And not just any droid, the same droid he killed in the first episode. This transformation of his character is so brilliant, and it makes me so excited to see what Favreau has in store for us in Season 2. IG-11 sacrifices himself to blow up the stormtroopers, and we now get the final battle between Mando and Moff Gideon. When Gideon passes by the second time, Mando takes off with the jetpack and manages to grapple himself to the TIE. He plants a grenade on the TIE and blows up the wing, sending the TIE crashing. This part of the episode was the only part that was mildly underwhelming for me. It wasn't bad, but I do wish the final confrontation was a little bit longer. So they think Gideon is dead, and Mando leaves Navarro with the quest of finding Baby Yoda's people. But of course, Moff Gideon isn't really dead, and we see him use the Darksaber. This cliffhanger reveal I think is pretty smart. Fans of the animated show went nuts over this, and casual fans know it's a lightsaber, but not one they've ever seen before. This was a great way to get people who haven't seen the animated shows to watch them. But after that, the credits roll, and that is the end of Mandalorian Season 1. I'm gonna rate the finale, Mandalorian Season 1 Episode 8, Redemption, a 9.9 out of 10. This episode was almost perfect for me. If the final battle was a little longer, then it would probably be a 10 out of 10. So those are my thoughts on why Season 1 of The Mandalorian was so amazing. But just because I thought the season as a whole was really good, that doesn't mean that certain episodes weren't better than others. So here is my final ranking of the 8 episodes of Season 1. At number 8, we have Episode 4, Sanctum. This episode was a fine episode that does progress the plot somewhat. It introduced Cara Dune, who is a badass, but it has very little rewatchability for me. Even though it's my least favorite episode, I definitely don't think it's the worst. At number 7, we have Episode 5, Tatooine Strikes Back. This is not a good episode. It is the definition of filler, but I would be lying if I said I didn't have fun watching it. Seeing the landscape of Tatooine was really cool, and I don't hate Taro Calican, so overall I was entertained. At number 6, we have Episode 2, The Last Child. This episode was a fun episode. We get to see the relationship between Mando and Baby Yoda grow, and we get more of Quill, which is always a good thing. It's a side story that I think is fine. It's not great, but it's definitely not bad by any means. At number 5, we have Episode 7, Avengers Assemble. This episode is mostly just set up for the finale, however, it's really done well. We get to see the crew come together, and it has a fantastic death scene at the end. Unfortunately, since this episode is mostly just set up, it's not one that is really memorable for me, and it doesn't really stand on its own. However, it's still a great episode. At number 4, we have Episode 3, Revenge of the Sin. This episode is a masterclass in expressing emotion through a helmet and has some fantastic dialogue. It does get a little slow at times, but I really do like it and I think it's a fantastic episode. Seeing Deborah Chow's work here makes me so excited for the Obi-Wan show because she'll be the one directing every episode. At number 3, we have Episode 6, Return of the Prisoner. This episode can be considered filler, but it's just so damn fun. All the characters that are part of this crew are all so interesting. Bill Burr is great, and I love the Twi'lek chick even more. We also get some badass fight scenes with Mando that make him basically Batman in Star Wars. At number 2, we have Episode 1, The Mandalorian. This pilot is so damn good. It introduces the characters perfectly, it introduces this world perfectly, and we get some really fun action. I think this episode should be taught when it comes to making a good pilot. I love this episode a lot, and I think it's the best pilot we have in Star Wars. And in first place, we have Episode 8, The Rise of Redemption. This episode is so perfect and so much fun. We get an excellent look at all our characters, we get really powerful payoffs to season-long arcs, and it sets up Season 2 perfectly. This is easily my favorite episode of the season, and it has such a high rewatchability factor for me. And that is my ranking of the 8 episodes of Season 1. Now, with this little time I have left, I do want to do some speculating on Season 2. which is a little hard for me because I don't have any strong predictions on what I think will happen. The trailers we've gotten so far haven't really revealed anything, and I like that. The only thing I think will happen is that we will get more answers on what happened with the Mandalorians after Rebels. We still don't know what this purge is, so I definitely think we'll get answers to that. I also do think we'll see Ahsoka and Boba Fett, but I really don't have a clue how these characters will play a role in the story, but we'll see. We'll probably get an answer to how Moff Gideon got the Darksaber from Bo-Katan, and we'll probably find out who that person was at the end of episode 5. I also think this season will end on a darker note, whether that be a cliffhanger or someone dies, but definitely something that is much darker, but again, we'll just have to wait and see. For everyone who watched this entire video, thank you so much for watching. If you want to see more of me, then you can go check me out on Star Wars Only's channel because we do the Chatooine show about every Friday. If you don't want to watch us on YouTube, we are available on Spotify and iTunes, so you can get the audio-only version there. I'm also making another channel called The Gold Man is Live. This channel will have all my old streams and future streams after I am done going live. When I am live, my streams will be on the main channel, The Gold Man, but afterwards I'm going to make them private and then re-upload them on Gold Man is Live. One more thing, for each episode of The Mandalorian that comes out, I'm going to be doing a reaction for them every Friday morning at about 9 AM, so if you want to watch my reactions, you'll know where to find me. I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Mandalorian Season 2 comes out this week and I am so excited. Don't forget to like and comment on this video, also subscribe if you haven't already. It really does help out the channel. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.